I'm not sure how obvious it is that my lips are kind of fucked up. Yeah, I kind of forgot to prepare too well for Comiket, so it kind of did a number on the lips due to the cold and all. But hey, hope you guys have been doing good and Happy New Year. By the time this video goes up, it's probably far enough into the new year that unless you live in another plane or dimension, it's probably already New Year for you as well. So I figured since Comiket was just last weekend, let's talk about it today. Oh well, it's a little before this for me, but yes, we're gonna talk about all the interesting stuff I heard about this Comiket. That said, first and foremost, for those of you who do not know what Comiket is, hey, welcome to the channel. Doujin events may be something you're gonna be hearing of for the first time today, but in case you're wondering, this is what the word Doujin means. I would actually try to read it out, but I feel like every time I do, it just takes way too long and it gets a little muddled, so this is probably more eloquent than anything I can physically explain. In the meantime, I'll just explain the event itself a little so you can try to multitask a little while we move along. It's a new year, new me, new you, new time to try new challenges like multitasking, reading and listening at the same time. So Comiket is the biggest doujin event within Japan and also the biggest event with weeb content. I'll explain later why I'm actually phrasing it this way instead of saying it's a weeb event, but essentially it's the biggest event with weeb content in Japan as well. In terms of sheer size, it is way bigger than even something like Anime Japan, for example. Although that said, in terms of the budget, Anime Japan obviously has a lot more. It's just that it tends to be a lot smaller in scale as compared to even this. So because it's a doujin event, you do have some stuff that's a little iffy in the sense that it's all obviously unlicensed because it's basically people creating their own works typically off of someone else's. Although you do get quite a bit of original content there as well, of people creating their own indie works, and it is this both that makes up this event essentially. That said, with this Comiket C103, there were quite a few new things that happened. In terms of changes to the way the event itself is held, nothing really changed. It is largely the same with C102 except they actually used a few more of the halls than before. But even then, it's a very small thing in terms of the overall logistics of the event, so you still had to buy a ticket. The tickets were still balloted for the early access tickets, which are basically those who could enter at 10:30. Then for everyone who wanted to enter at 11 and 1 p.m. respectively, you had the early afternoon and late afternoon tickets, both of which were differently priced, and the both were actually somewhat limited if you wanted to pre-purchase the early afternoon tickets. The late afternoon tickets, you could purchase them on the site this time, so even if you forgot to purchase tickets beforehand, you could still go for the event, although if you're planning to gun for something specific, you're probably not gonna get it. This time I arrived at 7 AM the first day and 8 AM the second day. Both times it felt like the queue was at about the same point as where I was in summer. That means that overall more people are actually coming early to queue. Because typically the thing is that with winter you tend to get fewer people coming early to queue because no one likes to do it in the cold. And so the fact that the queues are actually identical in length thereabout means that more people are coming for the event. And this is quite so. According to their own official statistics, the increase in the number of attendees has been a whole 10k people, which because of the fact that they're still selling tickets, it's somewhat restricted except in the late afternoon. But it's cool to see that the event is bit by bit slowly starting to pick up steam again. Although that said, it's a bit of a mixed feeling I guess, since the more the event starts to pick up steam again, it also means that the harder it is to eventually get stuff in the future. And hopefully this doesn't end up resulting in people queuing overnight again, although it does feel like even with the current systems, if this picks up enough steam in the long term, maybe like 20 years down the road, we might see people doing that again. That said, I get the feeling that the reason why day 1 was a lot more packed than day 2 this time was due to the fact that they put a lot of the more popular IPs, Doujin stuff on day 1 as well. Stuff like Genshin, Blue Archive, Nikkei, all of that was basically on day 1. So that might explain why, in spite of the fact that I went on 7 AM on day 1 and 8 AM on day 2, I kind of end up at a similar point in the queue. Meanwhile, day 2 had a lot more of a focus on just hobby stuff in general, so people making their own games, or all of the train, military, and stuff that isn't really completely weeb focused. Those stuff were all on day 2 as well, which might explain why there was this disparity between day 1 and day 2, I suppose. That said, when it comes to interesting stuff that happened this time around, there were quite a few things that caught my eye. First off, and this is the one probably most people already know about or would be interested in if they didn't know about it yet, which is the most popular series in terms of doujin works produced for it. At this point, I don't think anyone would be surprised by me saying this, but this time it was Blue Archive again. This isn't something that is wholly new. Last Comiket as well, it was actually Blue Archive, and it just followed on the trend with that. At the very least, from what is stated online, most places are either stating it to be somewhere within 1,700 or giving a very specific number, which is 1,718. The reason why they have arrived at this number is because of the fact that on day one itself, basically if you were to look at the catalog for the event, what you would have seen is that Blue Archive essentially took up 1 1/3 of a hall. So basically with this event, what the organizing committee tries to do is they tend to want to put all of the people creating similar content together. What you would typically call this area where it's all one specific IP is a shima or an island. And with the Blue Archive one, essentially if you take all of the boxes shown in the catalog and you multiply that by 2, because one block is typically a long table which is then split between 2 circles, you would arrive at 1,718. That said, I wouldn't take this number at face value due to the fact that, one, Comiket in recent years has also changed it such that you can actually purchase an entire table for yourself. So it's very possible for a single circle to now actually occupy an entire block on their own. And also on top of this fact, the application for this has to be done really very far in advance, sometimes even right after the previous Comiket. So for some circles that decide midway through that they want to change the genre of stuff they're doing, it's very hard for the committee to suddenly shift where their positions, and they'll end up in some other part in an isolated pocket on their own. And so the number generally would be slightly more than this, because I'm pretty sure as I explored the other halls as well that I did see Blue Archive circles as well, which is pretty cool, I guess. Like the fact that the series has gotten this big. For those of you who do not know how big like 1 1/3 West halls are, this is essentially the size of 2021's Reappearance, if I'm not mistaken, the autumn one. So it's basically big enough for them to occupy as much space as a Toho only, like a series dedicated event would have taken. And not only just a series dedicated event, but the only one that has gotten to considerably a large size on its own. After which second after Blue Archive would have been VTubing in general. Unfortunately, if you're into the really underground and indie VTubing stuff, from my friends who are quite into that, they mentioned that there really wasn't much of it at all. It's typically content created by people about the bigger VTubers rather than people going there to promote their own unique small indie VTubing stuff. So that's a little unfortunate, but at the same time it's pretty cool to see that the entire community has gotten this big for it. When it comes to the third position, this one is a little more iffy because if you look at the actual raw numbers based off how people have actually categorized it, which is basically how the Comiket catalog itself also categorized it, the third biggest would have been the train and non-weeb hobby related stuff. So all of it combined, everything from trains to vending machines to just people talking about how you can like meta game your way in the top ranking in some card game. The entirety of just hobby related stuff that may not necessarily be weeb related was third. But if we put that out of the way, because it's a pretty fragmented thing on its own, right? The guy who talks about sewer manhole covers and the guy who talks about train, they may not really have that much in common with each other. So we'll put this genre aside for now, and we'll put aside all of the ones that are old, so basically a smattering of random different series and IPs aside. In which case, the third most popular one would be Uma Musume, which I know like outside of Japan, it may not be as popular anymore, but within Japan, the series is still pretty big. And the fact that this series is actually third, to me at least, is quite surprising considering the fact that in 2022, Cygames actually put out a notice saying that they have changed their guidelines when it comes to how they will deal with doujin stuff created on their work specifically for Uma Musume, and they have basically made it forbidden for people to release R18 stuff and SFW stuff basically for Uma Musume in general. So this close to 900 circles estimated for Uma Musume, basically all gonna be SFW or family friendly stuff, which the fact that even after omitting all of that, the series is not only still getting this many circles, but the number of circles has been increasing year on year or since the previous Comikets as well. That is still pretty impressive to me. So for those of you within the Uma Musume fandom, good job on being able to still show love to your series without actually making love to horses. Although I bet you would love to. For those who are wondering, 4th and 5th are Type Moon and Toho respectively. Toho typically at Comiket, I don't really expect them to go all the way to the top anymore because of the fact that they already have their own pretty massive event, to be honest. Like, if you haven't been to Reappearance, you can look at my videos on it. The event is actually really massive, and I do get the impression that a lot more circles for Toho are assembling there instead of at Comiket, since really, if you really love the series that much and you have a single massive dedicated event for it, I guess if you're living overseas or in other prefectures within Japan, which basically means that you would still need to spend the equivalent of about 100 USD to travel to Tokyo, you probably would just travel for the specific event related series. Though aside from Doujin related stuff, there were also quite a lot of interesting things happening at corporate this time as well. For one thing, Mihoyo, this was probably the first time they've actually turned up at Comiket, which I know some of you might be sick of hearing it, like the whole like Genshin, Star Realm, many of you probably either really love it or just don't want to hear about it anymore. But to me, this specific, the fact that they're actually turning up at this event, this specific sign is quite surprising due to the fact that throughout the entirety of Genshin's popularity, they never really bothered to turn up at Comiket even once. And then this time, after Star Rail has released, they actually finally turned up at the event. So I guess you could say that, yeah, Genshin, clearly the forgotten child of the Mihoyo family. It could just be a coincidence, but you have to admit, the fact that they never once decided to during the entirety, like from 2021, right, Comiket had already resumed. Not once did they turn up until this time. There might be a sign there or something. But yeah, teasing the fans of the Forgotten Child aside, the level of popularity that the Mihoyo both got was actually quite terrifying to me. Like, I don't really follow a lot of Mihoyo stuff in general, so to me it's just more of like, I know in the peripheral because I look at the game industry data since it's part of my job, that they are something that is very popular. Like, in terms of gacha games, they are probably top in sales in like many other countries outside of Japan. But to see them at this event, not even selling out at like 12:30, but just cutting off queues in general, because the queue at 12:30 was so big that they just could not allow more people to queue while assuring that people could even get goods, was quite shocking, to be honest. I don't think I've seen another company do that up till this point. So yeah, I guess that's testament to how insane the queues for their booth was this time around. There's a very real possibility that you'll be in a queue that would essentially make you incapable of queuing for anything else, because when I walked past it at 12:30 PM, I basically saw a queue that snaked down from the corporate booth halls, which were on the second floor of West Side and as well as South Side, just snaking all the way down the entire convention center to the first floor. So it's quite bad. You probably would have been in a 2 to 3 hour queue. So that's quite insane to me. I don't think I've seen this happen in a long time. So hey, to you Mihoyo fans out there, y'all need Jesus, but then again, so do all of us, so y'all are cool. Also, aside from Mihoyo, it was really cool to see that many of the old visual novel companies were back at the event, setting up booths as well. For those of you who didn't know, back in the past, Comiket used to be a lot bigger of a deal, especially for these companies, since they couldn't really go to something like Anime Japan, so the biggest event where they could show off their stuff, especially for the NSFW, visual novel adult stuff, it would have been at this event. So in the past, they used to do very massive exhibitions of their new games, releases, announcements there. This time, they didn't really do it, but at the same time, it has been a long time since I've seen companies such as Alicesoft as well as Visual Arts there. So the fact that they're all back at this event again was just very cool to see, more for a nostalgic factor more so than anything else. Although I get the feeling that the reason why all of these visual novel companies, and perhaps why Mihoyo is also there this time around, might be related to the next point I'm going to be talking about, which is that as someone who, in case you guys didn't know, I work in a game company in Japan still. So the company I work for, they also got a booth at Comiket this time around. I'm not going to say which one, you guys can go and speculate that all you want. Like, I don't know if this is the same for companies across the board, but the company I work in is not a very massive one to begin with, and not some kind of AAA or something. But even then, from what I heard, the price was a 20th of the previous Comiket. So whatever you paid for back then, divide that by 20, this is what you're paying for this time. So it's massively cheaper for corporations to set up booths there, which might also explain why many of these visual novel companies, which, in case you didn't know, visual novel companies that are still focusing largely on that, aren't doing as well as they used to, even they are all back and setting up booths. It might be linked to this as well. Now, Mihoyo is a rich company. I don't know if this is the reason why they chose to set up a booth this time, but perhaps it might be related. Also, on top of that, they actually made it a lot cheaper to apply for a Doujin booth as well. Like, I'm pretty sure I saw that they removed most of the application fees, so all of the administration surcharge that they used to have, which I don't know why they even needed to have that in the first place, considering the fact that everything is being done online by machines nowadays. But all of that has been removed this time around, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, for the simplest booths, which is basically just taking up half a table, it's also cheaper in general, so that's already cool. I don't know how they're making money when everything is like this now. Perhaps they could finally be earning money from advertising enough to be able to offset this to some extent. Which, if that's the case, that's great to hear that things are getting cheaper. Maybe at some point we'll also see it get cheaper for randos who are entering the event, weirdos like me, so we don't have to pay like 1,000 yen per day anymore. Not like it's an issue, since 1,000 yen is pretty normal for most Doujin events anyway, but maybe one day we might see the event go back to being free again. Also, speaking of where things are at now, there's also a corporation there trying to market and display their new virtual AI Vtuber, which I know that we already have Neuro-sama, we don't really need a second one. If we try to bring a second one in the picture, she'll probably smite us with her AI thermonuclear magic. But yeah, apparently there are now corporations that are also trying to dabble into the field of AI interaction, basically, where they had their own little like AI VTuber looking little rig where you could just go up there and ask it questions directly verbally as well and stuff like that. I don't think this is actually gonna take the place of actual human VTubers, since people aren't there just for cute girl that speaks to them, but for the interesting, facets of the lives of these VTubers, which is something an AI wouldn't have. But at the same time, it was kind of interesting to see that AI is getting so prevalent, or at the very least the hype train is moving so hard that companies think that it's a good idea to show off their AI VTubers at Comiket as well. As to how good the VTuber AI thing they had was, no, it wasn't too good, to be honest. It wasn't too good. I think it took like maybe 15 to 20 seconds to reply to a very simple question, so yeah, the AI still needs a lot of time to cook answers to even the simplest questions, so not the best yet, but maybe we'll see more in the future, who knows. Also, in the catalog for the corporate booths, I did see something that was rather strange as well, so I decided to go down and give it a look, which was what in the ever-loving hell of the NTR gods is a Kenzen no Taimanin, which, for those of you who do not know what that means, Kenzen no Taimanin basically means something along the lines of like a family-friendly Taimanin, which, for those of you who know what Taimanin is, you know that's a little bit of an oxymoron there to begin with. Right, that's like saying, oh, my water is burning, or something like that. It just doesn't work that way. Oh no, my air is wet. Oh wait, no, that actually works out. That one doesn't work as well. Oh no, my enemy protagonist got hit by a truck and didn't end up in another wall. Nani? Or something like that, basically, it felt very off seeing a family-friendly thing for that series, because they had both a normal booth as well as a family-friendly booth, which, yeah, I decided to go down and give it a look. Turns out they were actually even more than before pushing the whole division of their stuff into both family-friendly stuff as well as like R18 stuff, because for those of you who didn't know, I did mention in some of the videos in the past talking about this company that runs this IP, but they have been slowly trying to initiate a shift towards producing more all ages content as well, aside from just the R18 content. So for a few years now, they have been slowly trying to push games that, while still on the Kuma side, are able to get into the public in terms of like all ages stuff and still survive, as well as the R18 stuff, which has been their bread and butter since the longest of times. And it would seem that they this time around decided to get two separate booths so that they could create a clear divide between the two, which I guess in a way it's a very interesting way for them to make even greater the statement that they really want to split the two at some point. I don't think they're going to split into two different companies, but they do have like two different brands. Basically, they have a subsidiary company for all of their all ages stuff, so we might see more and more of a division between the way that they want to run in the future. Although, from the looks of it, the queue on the R18 side was still longer than the all ages side, so I guess we still know what their fans truly want from the series. But yeah, in terms of the positive, interesting stuff, that's about it. In terms of negative stuff, I guess there's only one thing really, which is the fact that the scalping problem has been slowly reverting back to the older pre-pandemic days of Comiket, Like, I did see a lot more people who were there to scalp, as well as there are like scalping circles of like 5-6 people who were just buying out like 10-20 copies of something so they could resell it. I mean, I guess that's bound to happen because as the event gets more popular again, more people want stuff, and so scalpers are gonna be the garbage that they are. But yeah, unfortunately, that's also been getting bigger again. Like, I did see both a group of like 5-6 people of this like scalper groups on both day 1 and 2, and both were different groups. So suffice to say that these people are back at it again. I mean, it's to the point where even though I entered at like 11:10 a.m., so 10 minutes after people who purchased the early afternoon tickets could enter, there were actually booths that had sold out like by the time I actually joined the queue, and like even for the stuff that I first joined the queue for, stuff was already selling out. So suffice to say that the people who are entering within the first 30 minutes are buying stuff on a level so massive that people who enter like 40 minutes after the event opens can't get it either. So I highly doubt that it's due to people wholesomely just wanting to purchase the thing and then it's selling out, because with some of these circles, they do actually prep quite a bit of stuff. And for sure, these people who just wholesomely do it are probably the majority. I have no doubts in my mind that they are. But at the same time, you do have the small number of scalpers who are probably creating a very big supply issue for people who want to come after as well. I do hope that one day circles would find a way to address this problem a little more. Like, I do find that the way the one circle did it previously, where they actually got people who were subscribed to their fan box to show the thing, to basically be able to purchase some of the goods, to be not the best solution, but at least some way to identify the scalpers and prevent them from scalping would be nice. But yeah, in terms of the interesting stuff for the event, I guess that's about it. As per tradition with most of these Doujin event videos, I'm gonna just show 3 things I bought there, I guess, that were pretty interesting to me, and that are all more on the safe for work side, so maybe a way that I could show that there's like pretty interesting stuff you could purchase at the event, and that not everything there is basically just people looking at porn and funny, like cute stuff in general. So I did go to the Blue Archive side of the event as well to grab some stuff, some of it a little more safe for work than others. But I would say that for the safe for work side of the Blue Archive circles, the thing that probably left the biggest impression on me is probably this. You can't really see it because of the fact that like the lighting is a bit in the way, but yeah, if I do it like this, I think you guys should be able to see it a little better since the light reflection isn't as bad. But yeah, for those of you who are into the more Blue Archive stuff as well, you might recognize this one from the Blue Nyaarchive series. It's created by that circle basically, and this is the compilation of the Hoshino and her Goldfish series. For those of you who know it, you know it, and for those of you who do, I feel ya, bro. But yeah, for those of you who don't know it, if you're wondering why it looks a lot like a picture book, like the kind of stuff you read to your kids, it's because it's designed like that by intention. Because of that, there's just that level of wholesomeness to it that I really enjoy. Like, as you can see, it still has a very manga-ish style to it because of the paneling and all. But at the same time, the art style does give it the feel of a more like kid-friendly picture book as well, and I find that to be very interesting, the way that they made it so. Unlike most stuff at Comiket, where they typically just print a normal-ish, like very thin book, hence the term that some of you may already know. This one is actually a hard copy book, so like, according to the artist himself, like this style of stuff is actually rare enough and unique enough that the printing company that he uses to print all of this actually put up some of his stuff as like samples of stuff they could do. It's pretty friendly dude. I did talk to him for a little bit. Do hope to see him at more events in the future. I don't know if he will come for the Blue Archive specific events. I know that like the first time I ever saw him was at, I think, Sanctum Archive, which was a Blue Archive only Doujin event back in Tokyo, I think somewhere earlier in last year. But at the same time, they don't live in Tokyo, so it might not be that they would come down for it as often as one might hope, but maybe we'll see them a lot more in future events as well. So aside from that, I also did buy another party game. Now, some of you might wonder why I keep buying party games in spite of the fact that I don't really have anyone to play that with. And to you, I say, hey, did you see that one SpongeBob episode? You're like, yeah, I've got my friends, they're all right here, see? You know, maybe one day if my sanity drops enough, I'll attempt to play this on my own. And maybe if my sanity drops even more, I'll attempt to do that and record it for a video as well. Camera is having a little issue like focusing in on it. But for those of you who can read it, you probably already can tell what the title is, I would think. But for those of you who can't, the title of this game is essentially Kono Karoshi ga sugoi. So like Karoshi is where you work to death, so it's just really like that way of working to death is sugoi or something like that, which felt like so stupidly ridiculous and so real at the same time that I figured, let's see what this game was about. If you open it up, they actually do have this little bit of a paper factoid here that basically explains to you what is Karoshi. And it also explains to you what the legal definitions are, so that in case you were so overworked but didn't know that it was against the law, now you do, and you can go report the company that's actually making you go through all that instead. Like, that's pretty cool. That said, as you can see from the card's design, it isn't really the most weep thing, right? Like, it's all text heavy with the same icon on it. Most of it typically explaining very real situations where people end up actually working overtime in Japan. Stuff like, for example, having to have a meeting with the rest of the team that's overseas, because if you're working with someone in America, typically if you're in Japan, you might have to overtime. The rules actually were relatively complicated, since the whole game is basically a deck building game where you're essentially just drawing cards and playing them out in a way that would allow you to amass the most amount of hours, basically points possible, which does sound quite interesting on concept, since that's a lot like many of the other like tabletop-ish card games. But as to whether or not it's a little too complicated, since they have stuff like having one player monitor everyone else and like remove cards, and then like people having to bluff cards and stuff like this. We'll have to see if I ever manage to find friends to play this with. Next up, it's not only the Karoshi that's getting people into the shitter, there's also this doujin, which is about an introduction to all of the toilets made by a company called Starlight. Yeah, I did actually find this at the event. I don't know why this is a thing. It's actually quite informative, I guess. Like, it actually goes through and explains to you like what this company is, who they are, and then it gives you an explanation of like every single toilet that they have ever made that is still around today. Like, it's really just a guy making his own little like entire explanation guidebook to all the toilets made by this company. Why this even exists? I would be hard pressed to tell you. Do I enjoy looking at this? No, the toilets themselves actually look quite shitty. But aside from that, yeah, the toilets, I don't know. There's just something about looking at toilets that makes me feel a little icky. So looking at this, it's like, cool, you did manage to give us a lot of very interesting explanations and like details about each of the individual toilets and their features and how they're doing now, but at the same time it's like, that said, this was an interesting find, I guess. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope all of this was interesting. Like, when it comes to Comiket, there really is a lot of stuff to see there. Like, some of my favorite OC Doujin stuff as well. The artists typically, it's like at events at Comiket where they first get very popular. You know, stuff like this series, which I did talk about in the past as well as the one about the Jiraikei, also nanajimi, or your Jiraikei, which is a style of clothing, and your childhood friend who's really into it. Like, stuff like this. You know, this OC stuff that really looks pretty well done and that just has content that also just I can vibe with. So there's a lot of stuff like this at the event, and if you're interested in finding new stuff that might be pretty interesting and more to your liking, these events are also a good way to go about it. So yeah, I don't know. If you're interested in stuff like that, I do recommend giving those other circles a check out as well. Even if not the ones I mentioned, at the very least, looking at all of the OC stuff that turns up at these events as well. But yeah, thank you guys for watching to this point. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, feel free to like and subscribe. Also, thank you to Ran Yakumo as well as Rosio for the support this month. The money is going towards the creation of more videos going forwards as well. So thank you once again. It really does help a lot, since this money really does make it easier for me to create all of these videos as well. But yeah, that's all for me for today. I'll see you guys hopefully next time as well. But until then, take care and bye-bye.